Yekatit 12 is a date in the Ethiopian calendar, equivalent to the 19th of February in the Gregorian calendar, which is commonly used to refer to the indiscriminate massacre and imprisonment of Ethiopians by elements of the Italian occupation forces, following an attempted assassination of Marshal Rodolfo Graziani, Marchese di Neghelli, Viceroy of Italian East Africa, on the 19th of February 1937. The Marchese di Neghelli had led the Italian forces to victory over their Ethiopian opponents in the Second Italo-Abyssinian War and was supreme governor of Italian East Africa. This was one of the worst atrocities committed by the Italian occupation forces. Estimates of the number of people killed in the 3 days that followed the attempt on the Marchese di Neghelli's life vary. Ethiopian sources afterwards estimated as many as 30,000 people were killed by the Italians, while Italian sources claimed only a few hundred were killed. Over the following week, numerous Ethiopians suspected or accused of opposing Italian rule were rounded up and executed, including members of the Black Lions, and other members of the aristocracy. Most of the 125 young men whom Emperor Haile Selassie had sent abroad to receive college education, and were still resident in Ethiopia, were killed. Many more were imprisoned. Even collaborators like Ras Gebrehayewot, the son of Ras Mikhail of Wollo, Rain Marcos, and even Ayale Gebra. The latter had helped the Italians identify the 2 men who made the attempt on General Graziani's life. Background: following the defeat of the Ethiopian forces under his personal command at the Battle of Meku on the 31st of March 1936, Emperor Haile Selassie left Ethiopia to address the League of Nations to plead for their assistance against the Italians. He made his close friend and cousin Ras Imru Haile Selassie his regent during his absence, who attempted to set up a provisional government at Gore, in the southwestern part of the country. Gore, however, was located deep in the homeland of the Oromo people, who opposed his attempts to maintain imperial hegemony. Some went as far as to approach the British to recognize their attempts to create a Western Galla Confederation. When the Italians advanced on Nekempt on the 24th of October, Ras Imru found his position untenable and marched south in search of more welcoming surroundings. The 2 opponents maneuvered over southwestern Ethiopia, the Italians pursuing the Ethiopians, through the month of November until Ras Imru was caught on the banks of the Gojeb River, where after fierce fighting Ras Imru surrendered on the 18th of December. Meanwhile, loyalists made a poorly organized attempt to recapture Addis Ababa on the 28th of July. Various armed groups of Ethiopians pounced on the Italian positions in the capital city, taking the defenders by complete surprise. The first Italians they encountered were reportedly a group working on a well. However, General Garibaldi had expected an attack on the capital, and had prepared for this eventuality. Although a unit under Abebe Aragai had almost entered the Little Gebi, where the Viceroy, the Marchese di Neghelli, was working, the Ethiopians were repulsed on all sides. Despite a last rally by Abune Petros on the final day of the battle, who led a final advance in St. George's Square, the attempt on the city failed. Lastly, the remaining Ethiopian forces in the southeast were being run down. Ras Desta Damchu and Dejazmach Bain Merad had remained in control of the provincial capitals at Ergelim and Goba through November. On the 23rd of November, a motorized column under Captain Tucci had penetrated into the region, sparking a revolt by the local Sidama people. Ergelim fell to the Italians on the 1st of December, and Ras Desta and Dejazmach Bain Merad fell back into the mountains of Bail province. A game of cat-and-mouse followed, until the last few thousand soldiers under the command were cornered near Lake Shala and annihilated by superior Italian numbers at the Battle of Gogati, the 18th of February 1937. Ras Desta managed to escape the battlefield alone, but was hunted down and executed a few days later. With Ras Desta Damchu's death, all organized Ethiopian resistance to the Italians was spent. Attack on Rodolfo, Marchese di Neghelli. Despite having unquestioned control over the new Italian East Africa at the beginning of February 1937, Marshal the Marchese di Neghelli still mistrusted its inhabitants. During the previous year, following the capture of Jijiga by his men, the Marchese was inspecting an Ethiopian Orthodox church when he fell through a concealed hole in the floor, which he was convinced had been prepared as a man-trap for him. For that incident, writes Anthony Mottler, it is possible to date his paranoid hatred of and suspicion towards the Coptic clergy. Despite this, to celebrate the birth of the Prince of Naples, Neghelli announced he would personally distribute arms to the poor on Friday, the 19th of February, at the Genetlul Palace. In the crowd that formed that Friday morning were two young Eritreans living in Ethiopia named Abraham Deboch and Mogus Asdam. Finding the fortunes limited in the Italian colony, they had come to Ethiopia to enroll in the Melik II school, where recent events had overtaken them. Apparently accommodating himself to the new administration, Abraham gained employment with the Fascist Political Bureau, where his Eritrean origin, knowledge of Italian, and familiarity with the city made him useful. However, according to Richard Pankhurst, Abraham Deboch was bitterly opposed to the Italians, especially its racist practices. Before leaving the house, Abraham had placed an Italian flag on the wooden floor, driven a bayonet through it, then tied an Ethiopian flag to the bayonet. The official ceremony began as might be expected. The Viceroy, the Marchese di Neghelli, made a speech. A number of Ethiopian notables made their submission to the victors. Italian planes made a flyover above the city, and at 11 o'clock officials began distributing the promised arms to priests and the poor. Abraham and Mogus managed to slip through the crowd to the bottom of the steps to the Little Gebi, then began throwing grenades. According to one account, they managed to lob 10 of them before escaping in the resulting confusion. According to Richard Pankhurst, they were rushed from the scene by a third conspirator, a taxi driver named Simeon Adolphus. Pankhurst also credits him with providing the grenades that Abraham and Mogus threw. Behind them, the dead included Abuna Carolos's umbrella-bearer. The wounded included the Abuna himself, the Vice-Governor-General Armando Petretti, General Leota of the Air Force, and the Viceroy himself. One grenade exploded next to him, sending 365 fragments into his body. Viceroy di Neghelli was rushed to the Italian hospital where he was operated on immediately, and saved. General Leota lost his leg to the attack. For a while Abraham and Mogus hid at the ancient monastery of Debre Libanos, but soon moved on, seeking sanctuary in the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan. Somewhere in Gojama, local inhabitants, always suspicious of strangers, murdered them. Reprisals. The Italian response was immediate. According to Mottler, Italian carabinieri had fired into the crowds of beggars and poor assembled for the distribution of arms, and it is said that the Federal Secretary, Guido Cortese, even fired his revolver into the group of Ethiopian dignitaries standing around him. Hours later, Cortese gave the fatal order. For the rest of that day, through Saturday and Sunday, Italians killed Ethiopians with daggers and truncheons to the shouts of Duce, Duce, and Civiltà Italiana. They doused native houses with petrol and set them on fire. They broke into the homes of local Greeks and Armenians and lynched the servants. Some even posed on the corpses of the victims to have the photographs taken. In 3 days, the Italians had killed 30,000 Ethiopians in Addis Ababa only. The first day has been commemorated as Yekatit 12 by Ethiopians ever since. There is a monument called by the same name in Addis Ababa in memory of those Ethiopian victims of Italian aggression. The attempted murder provided the Italians with the reason to implement Mussolini's order, issued as early as the 3rd of May 1936, to summarily execute the young Ethiopians. The small group of intellectuals who had received college education from American and European colleges. The same day as the assassination, a military tribunal was set up, and by nightfall 62 Ethiopians were tried and shot. The Graziani massacre marked the almost total liquidation of the intellectual component of the resistance, writes Zuda. Thousands of Ethiopians of all classes were sent to detention camps at Danan in the Ogaden and Nokra in the Dahlak archipelago. Conditions at Danan were inhospitable, and the Marchese di Neghelli had given orders that the prisoners would receive only the bare minimum of food and water. As Sabaki notes, poor facilities, including latrines, the humid climate, malaria, stomach infections, and venereal disease took many lives, especially among those compelled to work on the irrigation canal or on the banana and sugarcane plantations. Between 10% and half of the prisoners died at Danan. Conditions at Nokra were even worse than at Danan, according to Sabaki. The detainees sent there joined 500 prisoners serving life sentences for serious political crimes, increasing the total number incarcerated to 1,500. These inmates suffered from lack of fresh water, sunstroke, marsh fever, and dysentery. The final reprisal struck in May. Investigators found that Abraham Mogus had stayed a while at Debre Libanos, and slight circumstantial evidence suggested that the monks had foreknowledge of the plans. The Marchese di Neghelli, mindful of his misadventure at Jijiga, believed they were complicit and on the 19th of May cabled the local commander, therefore execute summarily all monks without distinction including the vice-prior. The following day, the feast day of the patron St. Tekel Haymanot, 297 monks plus 23 laymen were shot. The entire population of the monastery,